Welcome to Buddha at the Gas Pump. My name is Rick Archer. Buddha at the Gas Pump is an ongoing series of conversations with spiritually awakening people. We've done over 700 of them now, and if this is new to you and you'd like to check out previous ones, please go to batgap.com and look under the interviews menu, where you'll see them arranged in several different ways. This program is made possible through the support of appreciative listeners and viewers. So if you appreciate it and would like to help support it, there are PayPal buttons on every page of the website. And donations are a little skimpy lately, so if you've been thinking of donating, haven't gotten around to it, give it a go. My guest today is Philip Weber. Philip had a 35-year career as an executive in the hospitality industry, hotel industry. He has been a member of Paramahansa Yogananda's Self-Realization Fellowship since 1999. He is known for his highly ecumenical outlook, holding a deep appreciation for many of the world's spiritual traditions and teachings, and often affirming Yogananda's adage, truth is one, paths are many. Phil is currently retired and living in Carlsbad, California. He prefers a quiet, contemplative life. He is not a spiritual teacher and has no online or social media presence. And therefore, any comments or inquiries for Phil should be made through his editor's website, which I'll be linking to from his page on batgap.com. Phil wrote two books, one called Grace Happens and the other entitled Reflections of Consciousness. And I listened to them both as audiobooks. And I was just telling Phil that, I've read a lot of spiritual books over the years, and these were among the most enjoyable I've ever read. And I think the reason was that he writes very well, for one. As you could tell from the intro I just read, he is somewhat self-effacing. He's not trying to, make himself famous or even sell a lot of books. And also just the subject matter, the thoughts he expressed, aligned very closely with my way of thinking about things. So we're going to try to pack in a lot of points from both books over the next couple of hours. And if any of you, as I said in the beginning, have questions, go ahead and submit them through the question submission form on batgap.com. Obviously, that's for the live audience. You won't be able to do that later on. So welcome, Phil.
Thank you, Rick. There are a few things in life that you end up doing and you go, yeah, I never thought I'd be doing this. And then there are a few that I never thought I would be doing this. And this falls into the second category. It's just something you never think about. So I really want to appreciate, share my appreciation for you and Irene for inviting me, and I look forward to our chat today.
Yeah. I mean, I never thought I'd be doing this either. If you asked me 20, 25 years ago, the idea never occurred to me. But everything in my life kind of led up to this. And this has been the most fulfilling period of my life doing this.
I think I've been aware of BatGap for years, and I think what you guys are doing is a real service, and I'm sure it helps a lot of people. So I know it has me.
Well, that's the aim. And we can discuss as we get into it, what we mean by helping a lot of people. There's lots of ways of helping people. And
absolutely. Yeah.
And, they're all essential, really. Okay. Irene says, let him talk. Go ahead. We have ways of making you talk,
Well, I agree that there are an infinite number of ways to help people, and I don't think that one way is any better or worse than another. Help is help.
Yeah.
And you do what you can, and that's what I would consider living a dharmic and self-fulfilling life. And it's not about what you can get; it's about what you can give.
Yeah.
And paradoxically, as like St. Francis said, it's in giving that we receive. Mm-hmm. And it comes back. And in my experience, it comes back. It seems like I receive more than I give, and I don't know why that is. And it may be an equal thing, but I feel very blessed by the people that I've been able to assist, both in through the books, through my years in hospice, through working with the homeless, and it's just it's just a wonderful thing to be able to do in life. So I've been very fortunate.
And in a way, the receiving more than you give is it's not so much a reward as it is a augmentation of your ability to give. It's almost like the powers that be say, okay, this guy is giving a lot, let's help him give more.
Yeah,
give him some more juice.
That's true. And I think the more one is blessed, then the more it's incumbent that one does, help.
Yeah.
If you've been, blessed with a lot of advantages, then I think it's even more important that you do, help in the ways that you can.
Yeah. And in a way, I mean, if ultimately everything is God, then we're kind of agents of the divine or sense organs of the infinite or whatever however you want to phrase it. And so, it's almost like it's not us helping, it's the divine helping through a willing instrument.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's the purpose of the books. I'm by nature a very, very private individual, and these things are that I talk about through my awakening experience and leading up to it and after, extremely personal. And it's, lifting my dress in front of the whole world. These books is not what I would have chosen to do, but it's not about me. And the book, particularly Grace Happens, when I was on a 40-day and 40-night retreat at a private retreat at a Tibetan Buddhist retreat facility up in the Arizona mountains. And I hadn't planned on doing anything other than being in solitude and silence are two of my favorite things in life. And the third day, it just started gushing out. And if I wouldn't have written, I think I just would have exploded there on the spot. So it just needed to come out. And that was the contextual field in which provided the space for it. And then, over the next year or so, I, kind of like 85% came out there and the next 15% came out, just filled in the corners here and there. And
right.
And then, fortunately, I have a wonderful editor who could piece it all together. The first one in particular was challenging because it had emails and journal entries from when I was, going through the initial shift.
Right.
And that wasn't my best time for communicating, so I did the best I could with it. And I hadn't planned on keeping the emails or using them at all, but I just had a little intuitive hit one day that said, just file these away and don't worry about it. Be useful later.
Yeah.
And ultimately they became, the first half of the book.
Right.
And kind of shown, a lot of these books are either in retrospect or what it may be like, but mine is fairly unique in that, most of what came through in that first book was as it was happening. And therefore, I think, I don't know if it came through for you, but, trying to figure out what was going on and the rebirthing process into unity consciousness instead of separation was fairly difficult for me.
Yeah.
And I hope that comes through in the book.
It does. And I think it'll be useful for people to hear. So we'll get into describing it. And one of my initial motivations for starting Bat Gap was to illustrate or demonstrate that awakening or enlightenment or whatever term you want to use is not the exclusive domain of really far out unusual people who live in caves. It's hotel managers and housewives and whatever, ordinary people. That's the subtitle of Bat Gap, is Conversations with Ordinary Spiritual Awakening People. And the reason I had that incentive was that I live in a town where a lot of people have been meditating for a long time, and people were having profound awakenings, and they would sometimes tell their friends about them and be scoffed at. Oh, this couldn't be happening to you. I know you. I've known you for years. You're an ordinary guy. So people had this thought that you have to be something extraordinary in order to have these kinds of experiences. But I really think that spiritual awakening is the birthright of everyone. We all have the potential for it. We're all essentially awakened already and just have to realize it. And, so that was one of my motivations for starting this, just to demonstrate that,
Yeah. And that's in terms of the first book, Grace Happens, An Awakening of Consciousness. That is probably the main message, is if it can happen to a guy like me, it can happen to anybody.
Yeah.
And then from there, it won't, possibly happen. It will happen. It's inevitable. It's built into the system. You can't, we're always playing with the house's money, and you can't screw it up. You just gotta, do your best and not worry about the result, because you're already there.
Right. And if somebody is listening to this interview and they happen to be on their deathbed, this applies to you too. He doesn't mean it will happen in the coming month, before you pass away. It'll happen. Life is not is not confined to the 80 years or whatever that we live in this body.
Absolutely. And I think one of the big stumbling blocks to people awakening is that they may in their head go, oh yeah, like Yogananda said, it can happen in one lifetime, and I get that. But in their heart, there's doubt, or I'm not doing enough of something, or I'm not worthy, or I'm not, whatever it may be. Mm-hmm. And that's just simply not true. In the second book I write about, when I first joined SRF, they had a lot of people I heard talk about a little metaphor of starting out in Glendale, which is near Los Angeles. And the idea is like, well, we're very close to Los Angeles, which was awakening, and that we just do the thing, and it's a short path, and you're there. And whether that's true or not, I don't know. I'm not passing any judgment on it. But what I think people tend to buy into that so literally that they think they're trying to get from point A to point B, from where they are to where they're not. And the truth is, they always were in Los Angeles.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So to interpret the metaphor, in other words, on some level, we're already realized. The
techniques just take away the appearance of that not being the case. It's not like you're adding something,
right? Because
you already are, a spark of infinite conscious awareness, but you just don't know it,
right?
And so the technique isn't getting us from point A to point B. It's just blowing the illusion that you're not already at point B away.
Right. And I just want to contrast that with what some of the Neo-Advaita people say, which is that you're already enlightened, and then so that's it, you're done. Don't bother about practices or anything like that. I mean, to take an extreme example, imagine saying that to somebody who is, deeply chronically depressed or psychotic or something like that. Yeah, on some level, they're already enlightened, but obviously some work needs to be done to, enhance the functioning of the mind-body system so that becomes a living reality and not just a concept. And so it's very important not to mistake an understanding or a concept for actual realization.
Absolutely. It's like Nisargadatta said, that earnest spiritual effort is critical. It like Adya says, it makes you grace prone. There are certain things we can do, the methods and the techniques and the teachings, that whatever they are that resonate with us are really important.
Yeah.
What I'm, I guess, wanting to stress through my writings is that it's more of an inner attitude. Like when I first started with SRF and I read that Yogananda said it can happen, I didn't just mentally go, well, okay, it probably does for 1 in a million. I said, if he's saying it's true, then it is true for me. Mm-hmm. And so the inner attitude was then this is going to happen. And you just tried to see it from the end, but you have to make your effort for sure. Yeah. And just saying that, that stuff like, wow, there's no one doing it and nothing to do and blah, blah, I think I don't think it's very helpful.
No. Well, we're going to get into your personal story a bunch, but let's elaborate on what this "it" is that we're referring to. And there was a question that came in from Anthony Parshall in Burlington, Vermont, who asked, "What exactly is enlightenment?" So why don't we start with that, and then we'll loop back and get into your whole history.
It's a great question, and it's enlightenment has got so much baggage around it. I wish they would just put it on the shelf for a couple 100 years and get a clean look at it. Because I think if you asked 100 different people, even if they're on the same, even if they were all in the same spiritual path, I think you would get 100 variations on it. I would start. I'm not going to say anything theoretical. I just, from my own experience, it's the best thing that I can share. First of all, I'll tell you what it's not. It's not some finish line that you cross and then you're done. Because once the awakening happens, there's an embodiment that goes on forever. You become an ever clearer, more refined expression of the divine and that doesn't eliminate our humanness and our personality quirks and our humanness. I think the idea that all of a sudden we're, nothing goes wrong and I'm done and now I can, just sit back and cruise, it's an unfortunate misconception. And I think I probably had that early on myself. What I think the fundamental attribute to awakening in my experience has been that the first thing is that separation consciousness dissolves. So the idea that I'm separate from everything else, you wonder how you ever saw it that way. It's like an optical illusion of consciousness.
Before you entered that phase, did you go through a phase where you did feel separate in the sense that you began to appreciate the distinction between kind of self and non-self, or pure consciousness and the material world, sort of a kind of a duality period, as if before there was a merger in which the world is seen in terms of the self?
Yeah, I would call that separate witnessing consciousness,
right?
Where you realize that you're not the content of the experience. That there's experience and there's me,
right,
which is dualistic. But at least you're not caught in the illusion that I am what I have or I am what I do. And of course, that's how I was for most of my life.
Right. Or I am this body, etc.
Yeah, I'm separate. I'm a body. I'm how much I have in my bank, and I am my car, and I am my house, and all this stuff is whatever identity you think that you are. You're definitely not. But right. The witnessing consciousness it shares a cab ride about halfway there, I think, and it's an important demarcation. And then I found that there was just a presence there that grew, and the witnessing consciousness presence as I ripened, eventually it was too much for the ego structure to hold up, and it crumbled.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's when the other half of the equation came in, and that's when I saw that I was the first realization, and in the first moments was I am nothing. I am no thing in particular. And then like a tidal wave come back on that. Well, if I am nothing, then I am everything.
Right.
And that was the realization. But then, integrating and embodying that was quite a ride. And it took several years to really get comfortable with it.
You mentioned an experience which you called the kiss, which you were playing solitaire on your laptop, and all of a sudden you got zapped. Is that what you're alluding to right now?
I am. I was out at the Hidden Valley Ashram, and it was a normal, beautiful day. I'd come back from lunch, and at that time, I was really enjoying listening to on Sounds True. There are a couple beautiful tapes of James Finley talking about one talking about Meister Eckhart, and the other talking about Thomas Merton, and both who I love. And so I had...
Incidentally, I just want to say that I've interviewed just about everybody you mentioned in your books, including James. But so anybody, if you're reading, Phil's books and you want to know more about some of the people he mentions, look him up on Batcap.
Yeah, James is a wonderful man. I've never met him, but I just love his work. And I was listening to his Meister Eckhart thing and just, killing some time. I had some spider solitaire going on and listening to that. And the words, it was just so beautiful. And I just kind of stopped and I sat back and it's just so beautiful, so beautiful. And I had just tears started. And then there was just this descent of grace that apparently I was ripe, and that's all it took. And for the next hour, I was drunk on energy. The Kundalini had gone nuts, and I was having fits of uncontrollable, alternating laughing and crying and saying, take me, and this is I am one. I mean, it was just the curtain came down, and that was the awakening.
Yeah.
But of course, there was a lot of work after that needed to take place. But that was the kiss.
Yeah. And incidentally, I mean, I've interviewed people who had an awakening like that while tying their shoes or while eating tomato soup or,
Yep.
whatever. So, you shouldn't all run out and get Spider Solitaire and a copy of James Finley and hope that it's going to happen. I mean,
No.
you could be like, breathing bus fumes in New York City and all of a sudden it could happen. So, yes.
Oh, and that's why I shared it, because just to point out that you cannot plan it.
Right.
And, you're not going to be,
when you're ready.
Yeah, it happens when you're ready.
But you can enhance your readiness.
Yeah, well, that's for sure, and that's what sadhana does. But ultimately, I think I wrote that that our sadhana sets the table, but it's God's grace that delivers the feast.
Yeah, and you had an experience of remembering, or in some way recognizing a past life with Yogananda in Boston or someplace, right? And so your spiritual sadhana didn't start in 1999 or whenever. It's you picked up where you left off, I would say.
I think that's right. And my sister and her husband moved to Waltham, which is just outside Boston. He was getting his PhD at Harvard in biochemistry, and so when I was I think I was 12 when I first went out there, and there was an immediate familiarity with Boston, and I couldn't explain. So I went back every summer, and on the 15th, when I was 15th, the third summer that I went out, by then I was, bussing around the city by myself and going down to Cambridge Square and playing, chess and with the locals. And we had an experience, or I had an experience. We went up to the top of the Prudential building, which had a great view, and they kind of went their way and I kind of went my way. And I was looking off into the city, and suddenly everything kind of fell away. And I could hear like an Indian drone. And I'm 15. I don't know what any of this stuff is. And I immediately had the remembrance that I had lived there. I lived there in the 20s, and I didn't make it till my 30s. And I was a white male, and that was about all I remember. Mm-hmm. And it kind of went on the shelf for 20 some years. And when I first read the AY in early 1999,
Autobiography of a Yogi.
Yes. And when I was reading about his time in Boston, that came back immediately, and I realized that we had been together. So when I was ripe in this lifetime, finding him was easy.
Yeah.
In fact, walking down the aisle I knew there was something that I needed to find, and I went to Barnes and Noble, and just kind of not knowing what I was looking for, and I looked up and I saw his picture on the spine of the autobiography. And if I hadn't, there was such a magnetic pull to it that if I hadn't have picked it up, I think it probably would have just flown off the shelf and hit me between the eyes.
That happens too.
I just knew that as soon as I got it, I knew this is it.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, I don't doubt that in the least. I think that kind of thing happens. And I think, many of us who are listening to this interview today, if you've been really keen on spiritual development, this is not the first time around that you have had that interest.
Clearly not.
There are verses in the Gita like that, which basically say, like, Arjuna asked Krishna, well, what happens if you don't make it? Do you not perish like a broken cloud? And Krishna says, no, you basically just pick up where you left off.
You do.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, you really do. And so, for people who are a little iffy about gurus, and I think there may be fewer and far between now than there used to be. I don't know if that's true or not, but I don't know. It seems like at least the emphasis on the guru is at least momentarily kind of falling away. But
there've been a lot of gurus that give gurus a bad name, so people are a little squeamish about them.
Yeah, there are. But I wrote repeatedly in the two books that God, guru, and self are one, and so it's not about a loyalty to an individual in a body or about some organization. It's really about to truth in capital T, that as long as is that your pole star, that you want to find the true nature of reality in yourself, which are one and the same, then I don't think you need to worry about whether you have a guru or not.
Yeah. I think that the ultimate ingredient, or, the most fundamental prerequisite to a spiritual path is just the desire, the earnestness, because when you have that, then the means present themselves, in whatever form. It'll be different for different people, but all kinds of opportunities. There's a British mountain climber, I forget his name, but this is often attributed to Goethe, but some British mountain climber actually said it, which is that there's really a great power in just starting a thing if you have the impetus to start it. And once you start it, then all kinds of accessories and aids and support opportunities will come to you that wouldn't have come if you just had waited for something to happen.
Absolutely. Life is supportive, and it always life is a contextual field that has always got our back. It's always got our long-term highest good, even though it may be hard to see that when you're going through a tough time. But you're right. When we make an effort, then things that wouldn't have presented themselves otherwise do. And it could be anything. It could be a book. It could be meeting someone. It could be watching a Bat Gap. It could be, it's infinite. And that's why I would encourage, anyone listening to this to not try to put any preconceived notions on what it ought to look like. Don't superimpose that onto the infinite, because you're just making it more difficult. It can happen anyway, always and in all ways, as CWG material says, which I love that line.
What's that, CWG?
Conversations with God.
Oh, Conversations with God. Yeah, you use these acronyms. I forget.
Sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, good. I read Conversations with God when I first started on the path, probably 2000, and I really loved Neil's the message in the books, and I thought the early stuff in particular was beautifully expressed, and so over the years I've tended just to incorporate some of that into my own vernacular, because it resonates so well with me. And
sure,
I love the line that God is with you always and in all ways.
Mm-hmm. Now, you sent me some notes of points we wanted to discuss from each book. Do you have those notes in front of you also, or just me?
No, I do.
Okay, good. So as we go along, I just want to make sure we cover as much as possible and get as deep into, we want to be both horizontal and vertical in our coverage of all your points. Sure. So feel free to elaborate on things or bring things up if I'm not mentioning them that you want to be sure to cover. And otherwise, I'll just sort of mention points as they jump out at me, but don't limit yourself to what I happen to think of or ask.
Gotcha.
Okay. Okay. So let's talk more at this point, unless you want to cover something else, about your initial awakening while you were playing Spider Solitaire and listening to James Finley, and then the challenges you met after that, and kind of getting your feet back on the ground and integrating.
Briefly, my sadhana began when I was in my teens.
And sadhana means spiritual practice, by the way, for those who don't know.
Yep. When I was in my teens, I was very interested in philosophy, and I read, widely, both Western and Eastern philosophers. And I really enjoyed a guy named Alan Watts, mm-hmm. who, was one of the main vehicles for, I think, presenting Zen and Zen Buddhism to the West back in the 60s. And I really resonated with his stuff early on. And then I turned 18, and all I wanted to do for a few years was party and chase girls. And
you catch any?
My share, yeah.
Okay.
Never enough, but I did okay. And then about 23, an alarm bell went off, and it was like, you need to do something with your life beyond this. And I was very fortunate to get a job at a hotel. Then I just loved it. It just was perfect. And within a year and a half, I was in management, and within 3 more years, I was a GM, and I went on to have a
general manager. You're really an acronym aficionado. Anyway, general manager.
Yeah, general manager, and went on to have a 35-year career in the hospitality industry, which provided me all types of opportunities I wouldn't have had in the world, and I got to see a lot of the country, and it was really fortunate that I had this. But about 15 years in, that started wearing off in terms of driving my satisfaction for it, and I couldn't understand the sense of dissatisfaction, but I had seemingly everything. I had a great house and beautiful, convertible BMW, and I was making good money, and all these things you think are going to be fulfilling, and ultimately they weren't. And so I fortunately never had any addiction issues, or I never really bottomed out in a bad way, but I was pretty unhappy internally, and I was watching TV one night, just channel surfing, and everything was just inane. It was just nothing interested me, and I was 30 seconds or a minute, and I'd hit the button and hit something else, and I can remember this like it was a moment ago. I hit the button, and it was, I guess, a PBS channel, and there was this bald guy on the thing talking about whatever he was talking about, and that wouldn't have lasted maybe a minute either, except he mentioned Alan Watts, and it just suddenly I froze, and I was just enthralled in what he was what he was talking about, and it was Wayne Dyer.
Oh, Wayne, yeah.
And I immediately went out the next day and got a couple of Wayne books, and that moment there was a shift, and that was another descent of grace. It wasn't the type that provided the awakening, but it was the type that provided the impetus for the reignition of my spiritual path. And within a couple of months, I got the Yogananda book, and the rest was just took care of itself. So there was about an 18-year period of my primary techniques were Kriya Yoga, Seva, which is selfless service, introspection. I went to SRF services on Sundays, and the community in Atlanta there was just phenomenal. I mean, when I first walked in there, they didn't have the temple yet, but it was in a little business park, and it felt like being wrapped up in a warm blanket. I just knew I'd come home, and the people that were there became my family.
Did you find Kriya Yoga easy to practice and effective, like gratifying? You had good experiences with it?
Very. I think it's a very powerful technique, but it's not for everyone. I mean, there's no one technique that's right for everyone. So I make it a point in the book not to promote SRF or Kriya or anything as an ideology or methodology. I think you have to find that on your own. It worked for me.
Yeah.
And, but I also spent a lot of time investigating other teachings. I loved Nisargadatta and Ramana, and, the more contemporary things like, Wayne and Deepak, David Hawkins, a little Eckhart Tolle, just, there were, I soaked up whatever I could from whatever resonated. And that went on about 18 years. And I found myself in 2016, I had started a new job, and it turned out within just a few weeks, it looked worse than worms on a waffle iron, Rick. I mean, it was just, I hated it. And then I started having health challenges, and, my heart was starting to go out, and I ended up on disability. And in early 2017, I was sitting at home most of the time, just sliding into depression. I would say, I mean, it wasn't clinically diagnosed, but I was in maybe, the worst shape I'd been in. And suddenly I thought about it. It's like, well, if this is the year I go down, I'm going to go down swinging. I'm not going to go down like this. And I talked about, downsizing for years. And so that's what I did. When the lease on the house that I had ran out, I gave away probably 80% of everything I owned, all the furniture, to the homeless facility that I was working with. And that was another thing that I did. Is one of the things I think that's really a great way out of whatever challenges you're going through, is to find someone who has the same challenges, only worse, and help them. And it's a great way to do it. So by the time I got rid of everything and I ended up back at the Hidden Valley Ashram in September of 2017, I felt better than I had maybe in my whole life. And within 2 weeks, the awakening happened. So I had about an 18-year spiritual path that led up to the KISS, and that's how I got there.
Mm-hmm. And then after the KISS, after this blowout experience, you went through what we used to call in the TM movement unstressing. In other words, there's kind of a collection of deep impressions and gunk in your nervous system, in your subtle body, that that a profound spiritual experience like that acts as a solvent to, and this stuff starts to dissolve and come out, and then you have to deal with that. So talk about what that was like a little bit.
Sure. First of all, I had intermittent bouts of bliss. And when I say bliss, I would describe that as like a fluid mix of peace and joy with a dash of euphoria. And it was disorienting. And I never really had much in the way of Kundalini issues. I think in large part because Kriya, you're really channeling that. And
you mean you're helping it to kind of flow in a unimpeded way or something? You're not. You're clearing the blocks and allow. Yeah,
and it's a gradual. So it up until that point, I had never. The only issues I'd had with Kriya and with Kundalini is occasionally I used to have what I call a Kriya or a bliss rush, and I used to meditate in a chair. And one day I had one of these rushes. And the next thing I knew, I had face planted on the floor. I'd fallen right off the chair.
Yeah.
And, damn near broke my nose. I mean, it was bad. So.
And you weren't just falling asleep. You'd gone into some samadhi state or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Just the energy was so great that I lost bodily consciousness for long enough to fall out. So from then on, I got a little bench and meditated Zen style because I figured, well, I can't fall too far from there.
Yeah.
But other than that, Kundalini never been a real problem. And, it's an intelligent thing. So my attitude toward it is you just kind of let it do its thing and not try to force anything. I think that's
good. Yep.
Yeah.
I know people who've had trouble with it, and in some cases who have had trouble because they tried to force it. They were doing like an hour of rapid pranayama or something, or, something to try to force the energy up. And that can be dangerous.
Well, you've probably read Krishna.
Gopi Krishna, yeah. Actually, there's some guy we might interview who was his right-hand man. He lived with him, and it would be interesting to get into that.
Yeah, reading his book, I realized that I'm not going to push it. It knows what it's doing, and I have a guru, and I have my Kriya Yoga, and I'm not going to try to force anything. And I would really recommend not forcing that because it's a powerful force, and you can get fried pretty quickly from it. And so
safety first is a good
safety first. Yeah.
And that implies with all kinds of things on the spiritual path, including psychedelics potentially, or all, in my position, I get a lot of feedback from different people, and I'm aware of people getting into trouble with, not applying that dictum of safety first.
You bet. The spiritual path is not like any other thing in life. I mean, there are casualties along the way, and whatever moderation means to the individual is probably what they ought to do, and not go too crazy on any one thing.
Which is a traditional approach, actually. The Buddha and the Bhagavad Gita and other, the middle way and balanced life. You don't fast yourself to death. And the Gita says, don't sleep too much or too little, don't eat too much or too little, don't work too much or too little. Just balance.
Yeah. But having said all that, suddenly I was having crazy Kundalini going on, and it was disorienting. And I found myself not through any cognitive, analysis of, well, this is happening, so I should do this. It was intuitive. I found myself outdoors walking.
What do you mean by crazy Kundalini? Like what actually was happening to you?
Well, I was in a euphoric bliss, and it was hard to operate.
Were you having kriyas where you're shaking around and stuff?
Not so much shaking, but it was hard to do anything normal, like drive a car or. It was interesting though, when I did need to drive my car, like when I would go down to the homeless shelter, for some amazing reason, it would subside when I needed it to. But when I was back at the ashram, it was just raging, and I found myself just walking outside for hours, very slowly, like a meditation walk. And I would do that for hours, trying to ground it. Not that I knew what I was doing at the time, but that's just what I found myself doing.
Yeah. Some people say walking barefoot is very helpful.
Yeah, I think it is. And certainly if that's happening, don't do anything that's going to stimulate it.
Right.
Like I wasn't doing any Kriyas, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But I found myself doing that for hours but everything else was difficult. I couldn't read very well. I remember flying out to see my sister, and when I was in the corporate world, I was like an Advantage Platinum. I flew like 250,000 miles a year for a couple of years and had more air miles than God. So I knew what I was doing, and yet when I got to the airport, the credit card that I used wasn't showing it up, and I hadn't written the flight down, and I couldn't figure out how to get on the plane, and I called my sister up, and can you tell me what flight I'm on? And she thought, this guy's lost his mind, and so everything was challenging in that respect. Yeah. And that went on, for about 9 months. And what really, really helped me, SRF, and I think most teachings in general on the progressive path, they're really good about helping you get there, but they don't do a great job, if at all, of telling you what to do once you're there.
Yeah. You mentioned you actually had a thing where this anger was bubbling up and you were swearing and stuff like that.
That was a couple months later. I got back from my trip, and it was just like all this gunk was being expelled.
Right.
And I was, it would have made a sailor blush, some of the stuff that I was, was spewing. And I felt horrible, and I knew that this was just a cleansing process of some sort, whether probably at the subtle body level, I'm guessing. I don't know for sure.
Yeah, I think so.
But what really helped me during that whole time was Adyashanti's talks. He had imagine he still does. There's a large audio library, and they're keyworded pretty good, so I could target what I wanted. Specifically about awakening to hear. And I downloaded a bunch of stuff. And even though I couldn't read, his stuff was just like, a lifeline to me.
You couldn't read because you were in the bliss ninny phase. And
my mind, my memory, which is normally phenomenal, had always been phenomenal. My brain was mushy.
Mm-hmm.
And so my memory was suboptimal for sure. And I didn't have the concentration capabilities of reading, but I could listen.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why half the book is dedicated to SRF and Yogananda, but the other half is dedicated to Adya, because his stuff was really helpful during those months. So Adya, if you're out there, you're the man.
He's out there. They probably won't be watching this, but
probably not. But I do sincerely appreciate his help during that. And then the other person at ground zero that really helped me, probably the most of anything, was the abbot, the minister in charge of the ashram. He'd been a longtime friend of mine. We'd known each other for close to 20 years at that point. And he had, in my estimation, was awake already. And so he understood what I was going through and was really helpful in some critical junctures.
Can people go there to this place and do retreats and things?
They do.
Okay. So people listening, if they think, okay, this might work for me, they could look into it and sign up for retreats and learn Kriya there or whatever.
Yeah. The only caveat to that, I think, is that I think the ashram is only for SRF members.
Which means you just have to get the right instruction and everything to be an SRF member.
Yeah. Okay. So if you're a lessons student, you mail away for the lessons, and that's all that.
So if you're into Zen or TM or something, it wouldn't be appropriate to go there. But if you're into SRF, then
or if you're into both or multiple things. I mean, they're not excluding anybody on that. Because both the abbot and I had wide-ranging interests in including Zen. He was really into the third Zen patriarch and some of this stuff.
I recall that some SRF fundamentalists gave you a little bit hard time for being so eclectic.
That's true, but it was I would say it was the exception rather than the rule, because Yogananda started SRF as a church of all religions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think most of the people that I dealt with, were very understanding of my wide-ranging tastes truth is truth, and you get it something said a little bit differently than somebody else, and it clicks. And so, if someone out there just wants one teacher and that's all they need are those teachings and that individual, that's great. But that wasn't my route through.
Yeah, I think for some people that might be an important phase that should be respected, and they shouldn't feel any need to be a dilettante, a superficial dabbler. And other people, I mean, I get exposed to different stuff constantly, and there might have been a point in my journey where that wouldn't have been a good idea, but now it does seem like a good idea. It's enriching for me, and as it is for you. So,
and there are times when, in my experience, where I was heavily into one thing or another, and that just seemed to be right at the time. But then when the shift would come along, and instead of, diving deep into Dzogchen and diving deep into Kashmir Shaivism or whatever it might have been, just it was appropriate. And so I picked that up when the energy is there, and I set it down when it shifts to something else. And one spiritual path can look like anything. And I think in our spiritual adolescence, until we really are firm in our own path, I think the idea of swapping around can be a little bit disturbing. But with the monks that I knew, they were all well enough along in their journey to understand doing that, and there was never any problem with that at all. And a lot of them did that as well.
So you kind of obviously have gotten through that initial phase. The dust settled eventually, and you got more integrated, and you could actually get on airplanes. And
I actually got a job. That was the big one.
You got a job, yeah. So
I could work, and that was important.
Right. So just kind of like, I guess the transition phase just sort of tapered off, and you found yourself.
It did. There was one key moment that really, I think, kind of bookended the KISS, and I called it a karma-ectomy. If that's not been copyrighted yet, I think I might do that. But I was doing Kriya one morning. This was about 9 months after the KISS, and I was at the ashram. At this point, I think I had already secured the job, but because of the length of their process, it took a couple of months to actually start working. And I had been doing Kriya again intuitively. And one morning, from the very first Kriya, there was a deep, deep focus, and the energy was just immense. And for anyone doing Kriya, normally...
Let me just clarify one thing. So Kriya is the name of the practice in Yogananda's movement. You do Kriya, but also Kriya is a word that sometimes means like involuntary movements that happen when you're having a Kundalini energy flowing. But in your usage of it here, you're talking about an actual practice you were doing.
I'm actually talking about a practice, but during this particular practice, the latter happened.
Okay.
So basically, for anyone not familiar, Kriya is mentally channeling the energy up and down the astral spine, the sushumna, and focusing it eventually here. So it goes up all the chakras, and then it just goes back and forth. And when I was at the ashram, in 2012 and 13, I got recruited out there, and I was the operations manager. So I did a lot of what I did in the hotels. There were renovations going on, and the installation of big solar systems and wells for irrigation, and renovating the rooms in the front office, and this is what I did, and it was a way to serve the organization and have a lot of fun for a couple of years. During that time, I was doing about 8 hours a day of meditation, about 4 in the morning and 4 at night. So I would get up about 4 o'clock in the morning, and I would do 180 Kriyas. And then I would do the same thing at night. So I was doing about 360 a day, which is an enormous amount.
And each Kriya is a whole cycle of going through the various points on the subtle.
Yep. So after the awakening, I wasn't doing any, because that's not what I needed. I needed to ground. I didn't need any more, energy throwing through. But it started to ground out, and intuitively I picked it up again. Just that was the intuitive hit I got. So that's what I did. And in one morning, it was a Thursday morning in right about now, mid June. I did. There's 108 beads, as you know, on a mala bead, and I had that, so I tracked them that way, and I went through 108, which is a lot, and I just felt great, and the energy was just incredible, So I did another 108, and then another 108, and then another 108. I ended up close to 600 that day, and while I was during the latter part of that, I had like my arms would raise up involuntarily, and from the waist up, it was just like a white light of energy hitting me, and I felt like it was bliss beyond belief, the greatest feeling I've ever had in my body, and it felt like I was being purged of the karma, and then at the third eye, at one point, it opened up, and I could see somebody's face, and then another, and then another, and another, and they flashed through fast enough to where I could see them, but not so long as I could get distracted or lost in it. And hundreds went by, and I knew intuitively that this had been past incarnations that were being fried. And it's like Nisargadatta talks. There's two types of kriya: one that can be mitigated, and one that has to be lived.
Two types of karma.
Out. Yeah. And this was the type that was being mitigated, and this is what kriya ultimately is designed to do: is to reduce that karma. And at the end of it, I saw it's like a symbolic type of thing, but it was this infinitely long train with all these cars behind it, and it had decoupled, and they all fell away, and all that was left was the engine and one car. And I knew that was the active karma that was left for me to burn out post-awakening, and that all the rest had been severed. And the reason it can get severed is, I'm sure is that it's not active. But what's active has to get mitigated through living it, because that karma is what got you to the point where you are.
Yeah.
So it's needed, karma.
Right. It's like Ramana, the electric fan keeps spinning even after you turn off the switch.
That's right. You unplug, but it takes a while for the fan blades to slow down. And so how long it takes the fan blades to slow is unknown to me. I mean, it could take months, years, it could take lifetimes. I don't know, but they will stop. And even then that karma will be gone. And this experience was the bookend. And once that had taken place, even though my memory was still a little mushy, the bliss subsided, and I was able to work, which was a very strange deal. Somehow I knew what to do and how to do it, but there just wasn't anybody there doing it. And then I was on my road back to embodying it in a way that was useful.
Well, it's funny you should say there wasn't anybody there doing it, because Anthony Parshall, who asked that first question, sent in another one saying, if you are not no one and not someone, who are you?
Well, you're both.
Yes.
If we are excitations of infinite consciousness, which I would posit that we are, then that is beyond duality, and so you can't name it. Reality is both illusory and at the same time here. We're both. So what I'm trying to say is the unity and the multiplicity are both there, and yet it's neither on its own.
Yeah. And also with relationship to Anthony's first question, let me take a quick crack at a definition and then see what you think about it, which is, like you, I avoid the word enlightenment because it has too static and superlative a connotation. But if we want to use it, I would say it's a state in which kind of a multidimensionality has been established, in which, there is a level of your life, which is, your fill. And there's a level of your life at which nothing ever happened, which there is no fill, and so you're kind of you're everywhere, you're nowhere, you're right here. And all of that has been incorporated into a living experience, which is perfectly normal and natural and functional. And you can drive cars and do whatever you need to do. But those subtler dimensions, sometimes might be more predominant if the situation allows it, and other times more in the background, but it's all always there.
That's well put, Rick. It does flow, and it flows between those two. Like Nisargadatta said, wisdom is knowing I am everything, or wisdom is knowing I am nothing. Love is knowing that I am everything, and between the two, my life flows.
Yes, nice.
So you can't objectify existence as a thing. You have to just be it. It has to be lived. You can't, because there is what would be there to separate and objectify it. It can't do that to itself. I mean, it does that essentially through separation consciousness. But once you realize that there is no separation, that the unity takes over, it can't be objectified. It can only be lived.
Yeah, which is it also can't be intellectualized. It can only be lived.
It's a non-conceptual understanding, and so if someone's asked, well, what is non-conceptual understanding? It's simply an understanding you can't put words around. It's that the Tao that is the Tao is the Tao that can't be named. You can't. As much as you want to try, the intellect, isn't capable of perceiving it. It's a non-conceptual perception.
Yeah,
and it's very self-evident when it happens. You can't miss it. But any sense of lack is gone. There's a fullness to the emptiness, if that makes sense. And things, for me anyway, things like loneliness, they don't happen. Boredom doesn't happen. It's not an exotic state. They call it the natural state, even though it's not technically a state. But it's very ordinary, and yet in that ordinariness, because you're not mentally superimposing dialogue onto what's happening, you're seeing it, as raw subjectivity, so to speak. And there's a beauty and a sacredness to that because the mental chatter isn't happening, and the judgments and the evaluations and things aren't happening mentally. It's an extraordinary beauty to things that you see every day that are right in front of you, and it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. So, we kind of started in the beginning of talking about enlightenment and, whether it was extraordinary or, ordinary. And you're expressing it very well here. It's the natural state, as you just said. And it's everyone's birthright, as we said earlier. And it's not some kind of superpower, but it's the most wonderful thing that could happen to you.
That's right.
And everybody's looking for fulfillment. Everybody's looking for happiness, and and like you were saying in the beginning, you were chasing it with BMWs and all fancy homes and things like that. And when there's nothing wrong with that stuff, but ultimately it's not going to give you what you're looking for. And you live in a nice home now, so you're not sleeping on a bed of nails. But I don't think that you primarily derive your fulfillment from the home, the room you're living in here.
No, but awakening doesn't preclude the enjoyment of anything either. So I enjoy going out and having a nice dinner or a glass of Oregon Pinot Noir or whatever it may be. I'm not sitting around in a loincloth, doing some practices or enlightenment, if that's the term you wanted to use, can look like anything. Our personality still is mostly intact, I would say. Some things have changed, but it is the most ordinary of things, and yet the most beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, on the news at Christmas time, they always have these stories about how much people are shopping, and they always have these scenes of people trampling each other when the doors open at 6 a.m. or whatever to get the latest big TV and having fist fights in the aisles. And, and it's like just such a demonstration of the desperation that is so common for trying to derive fulfillment from things.
And people, the mistake that they make, at least the mistake that I made, is that once like I really wanted the BMW, it could be anything. And then you get it, and then you feel peace for a while, and you think, well, it was the BMW.
Right.
But then the next thing, and then the next thing, and the next thing, and the bigger house, and the cuter girlfriend, and whatever it may be, you just keep going and going. And what's fulfilling that desire and that yearning, that feeling of lack for a while isn't the thing. It's that the desire went away.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I don't have any desires. Now that doesn't mean that I might not want a burrito for lunch and some ice cream afterwards. I'm not talking, but there isn't anything I need.
Yeah.
I don't have any sense of lack, and I live in a beautiful place, but I live very simply, and I don't, there's nothing I feel I need to do or to have. Life takes care of me in the way that it does. And so what is awakening to me is being okay with what is.
Yeah. Well, you were talking about bliss a little while ago, and you weren't experiencing bliss because of something you were tasting or seeing or smelling or hearing or touching. It was just bliss, like this intrinsic happiness that was welling up inside of you, regardless of the external circumstances.
Yeah, it's the peace that passeth all understanding.
Yeah, and that's a kind of a vivid illustration of what all the scriptures say, which is the kingdom of heaven is within you, or Brahman is Ananda, Satchitananda. We all possess this inner reservoir of happiness, which we overlook for the most part, most of us, and desperately seek outwardly for that which we already possess inwardly.
That's right. Yeah, and what I found is there was a kind of an interesting time in those first 9 months where it felt like the inside was larger than the outside, and so that was the
elaborate on that.
Well, it felt like in unity, the unity that I was experiencing, it was like Douglas Harding talked about, that the head just isn't there, and the outside was becoming my inside. And so what it felt like in terms of a reference point was it was larger than anything that I had experienced, because the reference points were gone. And so that was part of the process where the separation was falling away. And one of the things too, I would say to anyone is that, if you're a seeker, don't let that be an identity. And ultimately, the seeking doesn't end. The seeker dissolves.
Yeah.
So
and wouldn't you say, has it been your experience that, there's some Papaji said, give up the search, and
Mm-hmm.
I think that can be a premature instruction in some cases.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Because one could say, all right, whatever, I'll just kick back and have a beer and watch football, and it'll happen if it's supposed to happen. And
that's not the message.
Right. And maybe that's not what he meant anyway. But in your case, let's put it in terms of you, wouldn't you say that in a sense, we maybe don't want to use the word seeker anymore, because there's a santosh, there's contentment, but you're as much of an enthusiast for all this stuff as you ever were, and like you're a kid in a candy shop with all kinds of interesting things to explore and learn, and all that.
Yeah, it's the real voyage of discovery begins after the awakening, because then you're right back where you were. Only now it's like you're seeing it for the first time, like T.S. Eliot said, we arrive back where we were, but now we see it for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Rumi had said I'd been knocking on the door only to find myself knocking from the inside.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting thing when it happens, to say the least. But now, I still enjoy things, basically all the things that I used to enjoy, I still do. Excuse me. Only I don't have any emotional investment in them. So
right.
If the Red Sox lose to the Yankees, I'm not going to be happy about it, but it's not going to ruin my day either,
Well, I prefer the Yankees win personally, because I was a Yankees fan when I was a kid. I lived in
this interview is over.
I lived outside New York City, and I would lie there and listen to my little crystal radio and Mickey Mantle and Roger Maris and Yogi Berra and Whitey Ford and the whole gang.
Well, I'll let you have that. I again, these things, you can enjoy them, but but you'll also see it for what it is, and it's just not that important.
Icing on the cake.
But on the other side of that, I think it's really important not to deny your humanness, and things can still happen occasionally, that are experienced, as a cloud, something, I see some things in the world that happen that are, some of the just, the utter unnecessary cruelty and poverty and war and things. And I feel those more intensely now than ever before for two reasons. One is I view it as happening to me in one sense.
Yeah.
And also, when the sense of separation dissolves, there's no defense mechanisms around the heart. And so I tend to feel much more keenly now than ever. And I can be profoundly sad, or angry, or these things still can come up. The difference is that they don't last as long and they don't happen as often.
Yeah.
But awakening is not some panacea that all of a sudden you don't feel things and things don't ever bother you and everything goes right and all that. That's not what it is. At least not for me.
There's an analogy that's interesting here, which is like, I didn't make this up, but let's say a very unenlightened state would be like stone, and you can scratch a line in stone with a iron bar or something like that. It's hard to scratch a line, but once you've scratched it, the line stays there quite a while. It's not a deep line, but it's there and it lasts a long time. Or let's say a little bit more evolved state would be more like sand. You can dig a deeper line in sand more easily, and it's erased more quickly. Then line in water, you can make a deeper line, so you can put your whole arm through it, but it disappears almost instantly. And then line in air, you can just dive through the air and there's no trace. So like that, in a nervous system, in a state of consciousness in which one is very bound and entrenched, then you don't have the capacity for deep experience, but the experiences you do have leave very lasting impressions. And I won't go through all the steps, but finally, you in the state you're describing, you feel very, very deeply, but it doesn't create this lasting impression that takes forever to work out.
That's right, and the reason it doesn't last is because it's processed fully.
Processed fully, yes.
Yeah, whereas in separation consciousness, the impressions happen and they don't get, things happen, traumas or
they accumulate.
And they accumulate, and they don't get processed. And you might get through some of it in a lifetime, but you're also creating more. And so that's the wheel you're trying to get off.
Yeah.
But things get processed fully because you're not there. There is no fear there of feeling what you're capable of feeling.
Right. And one of my motivations with all this is, like you were just saying, all these horrible things that happen in the world and how how terrible they are for the people who experience them, and they're very sad to observe, is the realization that if the world were populated more by people like you, or entirely by people like you, not exactly like you, but
Red Sox fans, one and all.
Red Sox fundamentalists. Everybody'd have to wear Red Sox shirts. No, but
fine with that.
You know what I'm saying?
I do.
Then if that were the case, then we wouldn't have these wars and these these inequities and the famine and the poverty and the fanaticism and all this horrible stuff, because all that stuff is just the manifestation of the collective consciousness of billions of people who are like the rock, that have all these deep grooves etched in it.
That's right. However, on the other side of that, so from a place of love, it breaks my heart, and that's what I'm feeling. From a place of wisdom, I realized that the things that are happening in the world are happening because, without suffering, there isn't really any grist for the mill. In terms of, if I hadn't been gradually more and more dissatisfied with the corporate world and everything that I had, the shift wouldn't have happened. I mean, that was actually fueling the shift. And so I realized from a place of wisdom that everything is happening because it had to happen. And the proof for that is that it is happening.
Yeah.
And that people are in their own way, in their own place, in the perfect contextual field for them to evolve. But I wouldn't want to live in that knowing alone, because that would be a cold place. You'd just go, oh, well, that's their karma, tough luck. And that's not where you want to be. It's not where I want to be living from. And so knowing that helps me not become overwhelmed by the suffering that I feel.
Right.
But feeling it allows compassion, and then you do whatever you can do from wherever you are to alleviate it, and that's part of the perfection as well.
Yeah, and I totally agree with what you're saying, and it's easy for people to see how getting bored with BMW might be an incentive to spiritual advancement, but what would you say to the person who says, yeah, but how about the Holocaust? How about what's happening in Gaza? To all those children and everything. How can you frame that in the context of some kind of a loving God that is trying to help all those people evolve? It seems that you really have to step back and zoom out to make sense of that.
You do, and that's the age-old question: is why do bad things happen to good people, and how can a loving God permit the evil that we see? And my response to that, from a place of wisdom, is that even those things, even the Holocaust, even Gaza, even I don't know, there's always something that really gets you. And for me, child abuse and animal abuse is two that really make me want to just strangle somebody if I see him doing it. Even those things, though, in the grand perfection are necessary because they're there. And so life doesn't happen to look a particular way for me.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, if there's something that I can do to help somebody, then I absolutely will. And that's part of the perfection as well. But, I don't have, an ego mind that is superimposing what it thinks life ought to look like onto life. I think Anthony DeMello said awakening is an absolute intimacy with the 10,000 things, or something close to that, you realize that it is the way it is because it needed to be that way. And the proof for that is that it is.
Yeah. Sounds very,
you don't have to like it.
Sounds very Byron Katie-ish.
It is. Yeah. Yeah, it is. And I don't like it. I wish we had a world that that got along as a species. We haven't even figured out how to stop killing each other. I mean, people that think we're, some advanced point in our evolution, I would say, well, why are we still killing each other? And why do 2 billion people not have electricity and working plumbing and living in abject poverty? I think, from a place in consciousness, we still have a long way to go, but you do what you do in the outworld, in the outer world, because that's what you do. But then the main thing is that you work on yourself, because that's the ultimate gift that you can give to the world.
I saw a touching thing the other day. It was an article, and it was about this professional bullfighter who had been doing that for quite some time. And one day he was there, and he and the bull were facing each other, and neither was sort of attacking at that point. And they looked into each other's eyes, and the bullfighter just tuned in to the bull, and he sat down and started weeping. And he thought, what am I doing? He had this epiphany. And, long story short, he left bullfighting, became a vegetarian, and and became an activist for stopping bullfighting. But it was just that moment of connection, on a soul level that turned him around.
And that's a great point in what we were talking about earlier. Is these epiphanies, these satarais, or these awakenings or shifts, whatever term you want to use, it can happen anywhere. And when we're open enough, he was open enough in that moment to where the look in the bull's eyes was enough to create the shift. And
Yeah.
that's the beauty of life is the ultimate vehicle for, its own evolution.
Speaking of shifts, let me do a dramatic, abrupt segue here.
Sure.
you recounted an experience in, I think it was possibly your second book, I'm not sure, where you went into this really deep state. It was almost like you can elaborate. Maybe it was an out-of-body experience, and you encountered Mayor Baba, who you had an affinity with. And
Yep.
he kind of did a number on you that was very interesting. You know what I'm alluding to. Let's talk about that for a minute. We'll discuss it.
Sure. Yeah. This was probably the most amazing, mystical experience that I've had in this lifetime. And mystical experiences they're fine if you have them, and if you're not having them, I mean, people are wired in different ways. If you're not having them, I would almost say you're better off, because mystical experiences they're a blessing in the sense that you have them, but then the ego mind can attach to that and then go, oh, when's the next one? Or why am I not having another one? Or somebody else can hear it and is like, well, why has he got one and I don't? And, that's just what ego minds do. So I've tried to, in the experiences that I've had, I would use the term grateful indifference. So I'm always grateful for them happening, but I'm not going to, experiences come and go. And at the end of the day, has the experience changed where you're living from? And that's, and if it hasn't, then it's a blessing, but let it go and stay in the now and keep doing your work is what I would say. So that's my spiel about mystical experiences as a whole. On this one in particular,
if anybody's been in a spiritual movement, and there's always been people who have been, mic hogs who get up and talk about their flashy experiences, and and often it's a kind of a one-upmanship, ego aggrandizement kind of a thing, and you got to sort of look at how these people actually walk their talk, if they do, to see what whether that really is meaningful or significant at all.
Yeah, and I did not want to include this experience in the book from a personal standpoint because of all that. But there was an energy that just said you need to write about this, and you just really don't have much choice. So I trust that, and I did.
Yeah. There's an energy that's making you talk about it now.
There's an energy. Yeah, it's called Rick Archer. So I will. Life isn't about me, so I'll do my best here.
Okay.
It was an out of body, and Meher Baba, Yogananda is my guru and my foremost master. But there have been other masters that have also radically assisted me over the years at different times. St. Francis early on, Meher Baba early on, and afterwards as well.
And let me just ask, because you were inspired by their books, or because you actually established some kind of a subtle affinity or connection with the soul of St. Francis or something?
It was through their works, but through their works, it felt like a transmission.
Felt like you tuned into.
I never had any visions of St. Francis, or anybody else but there was a connection in the heart,
right?
Through like it was a living thing, and not just an intellectual.
Yeah. Well, people really get that. I mean, with Jesus, with Ramana, they turn into these people that may have been dead for a couple thousand years, and it's very real and present.
Oh yeah, and during the time of the awakening, Meister Eckhart was a big one, and Nisarg Gadot, and afterward, of late, I've really, in the last couple of years, really connected with Longchenpa in the Dzogchen tradition, with Abhinavagupta in Kashmir Shaivism, and even with Plotinus in the Neoplatonism. I really enjoyed that whole thing for a while. But as Meher Baba was really, and still is, really important. I mean, he and Yogananda, I think, are my two main guys, And there's a wonderful retreat center in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and so. The interesting thing about this was that this experience came during an SRF retreat, which just goes to show that there's these guys don't, they're not fighting over devotees. It's whose ever consciousness is reaching out and needs it at that point. Because ultimately they're just one aspect of ourselves. I don't really even look at it as personal so much, but so I was at an SRF retreat and I had an out of body experience. And to anyone wondering how if you've had one, there's just a difference between a dream or even a lucid dream. There's a qualitative difference. And I was with Baba, and he put his hands on the top of my head, and I felt, and I could see both from within and without, a white light coming up all the way through my body. And when it hit, it was like I was being electrocuted from the inside out. It was agony. And I don't know how long that went on, but all of a sudden it was like I was floating in the cosmos. And it wasn't that I was experiencing bliss. I was bliss. It was an ever-changing, ever-new bliss that the masters have written about. That what the point of that was, I don't know. But it happened twice. He did it twice. And I looked at him afterwards, and I said, I almost, when you, at least in my experience, when you're having these kinds of interactions, you're not thinking on a mental level. It's just really wells up out of the soul. And I said, why isn't my master doing this for me, meaning Yogananda? And verbatim, he smiled so sweetly, and he said, because at this level, we are all one. And lately, your consciousness has been reaching out. And I always knew from then on that no matter what we need, whoever the seemingly outward vehicle is, we get what we need. And so if that would have been all the experience was, that still would have registered about a 9.5 on my mysticalometer, But then I looked down for some reason, and he followed my vision, and there was just like a little freckle right here about halfway, in between my waist and my shoulder. And he reached out with his left hand with a little, like a carpet knife or something, just kind of wood with a kind of a slightly curved thing. And he flicked it. And I fell back because it hurt. And when I came back up, there had been something attached to my energy body, I guess, because half of it, the half that he'd ripped out was kind of flapping around in the air, and the other half was still hooked in. And it looked like something out of a Hieronymus Bosch painting. It was, and this is just my intuition, I really don't know, but it looked like some sort of an astral parasite, which, I've heard some people posit that these can be the source, or at least one source, for addictions and things like this. And that's why they're incredibly difficult to get rid of, addictions, or you almost kind of have to just starve them to death, not the only reason, but one. And it was about 3 or 4 inches tall, and on the top it had alternating yellow and red checks, and it was horrific. I'm like, what the, it's like, I started doing this, and I started saying, take this away. I freaked, it's like, God dang, this thing's in me, and I want it out. And he sat there for a minute, and then he flicked it again, and I passed out. And then I woke up back in bed, obviously. I was back in the body, and it took a couple hours before I could move. I was just frozen, staring up at the ceiling. It was a little after dawn. There was a pale light, so I knew about what time it was. And eventually I got, one finger to move, and then another, and then I started rebooting. And that was the experience. And it was crazy.
Well, when you got up and took a shower and started your day, did you feel like something huge had happened? Like you'd really been freed from something that had been plaguing you deeply for a long time?
Two things happened. One is I woke up with a headache at the third eye, which I think was from some sort of overstimulation as he put that energy in me. And it got worse throughout the day. It was really bad. And then, like an idiot, I threw gas on the fire. I tried to do Kriyas thinking that was going to help, and it only made it worse. So don't do that. If you've got something happening here, it's leave it alone. Yeah. The other thing that it took about a year is it felt like there was a kind of a hole, like a membrane that had been opened up, and it felt like kind of an energetic breathing right here. and it took about a year for that to go away. Like something in the etheric body had to heal over, and that there was that gap there. And it was a very strange feeling. I didn't have it 24/7, but I had it quite a bit off and on.
Yeah. I guess the reason I wanted you to tell that story is that I have a feeling that that is something fairly common that we're generally unaware of. And that, as you said, it could be the cause of addictions, of which there is a whole lot these days, and addictions to all kinds of things, some sort of astral entities that are feeding off that kind of energy and that are impelling us to behave in certain ways in order to be fed. And so I don't know what people can do about it other than maybe do spiritual practice and any kind of purificatory things. I had a thing one time where something seemed to be attacking me, and I just started to do this Sanskrit puja in my mind that dispelled it. So, or people talk about, exorcisms and prayers and, that dispel negative entities. So there are probably things in all the ancient traditions that deal with this kind of thing. So I just wanted to touch upon it for whatever benefit it might provide people listening.
Well, sure. And I mean, the human body, the physical body has all kinds of germs and parasites and things. So why wouldn't that be the case at the astral level?
Right. Subtle body. There was another neat story you told about how there was a new Yogananda center being opened in Atlanta, and you felt this kind of compulsion to show up there at midnight and do something. I'm not sure if you knew what. It was kind of like a strange thing for you to do, but you've just followed your impulses, and it turned out to be very interesting. You want to tell that story?
Sure. So in let's see, it would have been somewhere in 1999. I mentioned that when I first started with SRF at the Atlanta Center or group, that they were in like a business park. They had a rented kind of a place, but through some very generous individuals in the group, a temple was built. They found, I won't go into all the details, but it was pretty miraculous in how they found land and how it could be afforded, and how the architect just happened to be there, and then the construction company had a window when they could have done the work, and everything fell together in a way pretty incredible. I lived about a mile from when they built the center. I started feeling in the fall of 1999. I started feeling like someone should be there at midnight when the property came theirs. I didn't know why. And I thought, well, it's going to, it's Atlanta in the winter. It's going to be wet. It's going to be cold. This really wasn't what I wanted to do, but it just nagged me for a couple of months. And then as I got closer to the date, it was warm. It was dry. There was no reason not to. And so I got, all right, I'm going to take my blanket. I'm going to go there, and I hope no one sees me. Police are out everywhere looking for drunk drivers. And there's this guy sitting out in the field. I think he's lost his mind. And I sat down and I tried to meditate, and there was traffic, and I felt like an idiot. And so I was restless. And I'm sharing this because what happened wasn't because of me. It was in spite of me. It suddenly everything fell away, and I couldn't hear any noise. I'm sitting there, and in my hands was a small bowling ball size glowing orb of energy, I guess. And I didn't know what to do. I had my eyes closed, so I was seeing it through the third eye, and something just said, don't open your eyes. And then I kind of mentally said, well, what do I do? And I heard the word prayer circle, which at the end of an SRF service, everybody raises their hands and they Om 3 times, sending out, healing vibrations to the universe. And so that's what I did. I raised my hand, and I slowly went out like this, and I could see the thing flying apart. They were kind of yellowish orange, and like when the little particles started floating down, it kind of looked like a Cheeto, and best I can do. And I could see them permeating the ground, and most of them went in the direction I was facing, but all of them kind of went somewhere. And then just as fast as went out of it, I came back in and I could hear the crowd or the noise, and was looking at the ground, and I'm like, well, my intuition said that the ground had been consecrated, it had been blessed, and that a physical intermediary had been needed for the energy to come through the higher planes into this plane. So I packed up my stuff and I went home, told a couple of people about it, and they were like, dang, that's really cool. And that was it. Clearly there were people in the Atlanta group that deserved it more than I did. They'd been working for 30 or 40 years to achieve all this. And I was kind of a Johnny come lately in the group at that point. And so maybe they just felt like, well, hell, they being the masters felt like, he's only lives a mile away. We'll use him. I don't know how it happened, but it was, I felt incredibly blessed to have been chosen for that. It wasn't anything I did. I mean, I was the one that got picked, and the land had been permeated. What I found out later was the direction that I was facing was actually where the building was built. So the area that got the most of it was actually where the center, where the temple was going to be sitting.
Nice. Celestial Cheetos. Okay, so now we got about 20 minutes left or so, and there are a few points that maybe we could cover well in the remaining time. The gradual, direct, and pathless path controversy would be one. Grace would be another. Free will determinism, non-doership is another. And anything else that you see on that list of points you sent me, but those three jump out at me. So gradual, direct, and pathless. Let's do that first. What are your thoughts on it?
I think that whatever path is resonating with someone at the time is the best path. So a lot of people, but they hear short or direct path and they think it's got to be better. And I would say that's not true. I woke up through the progressive path.
Yeah.
So
McDonald's
it obviously works.
Is not necessarily better than a fine restaurant where it takes a few hours to eat.
No. If I have given up, the techniques, the methods that I had chosen early on for something labeled short, I don't think I would be sitting here. It worked. The teachings through Yogananda and SRF do work, and I can say that because they work for me. Mm-hmm. I'm sure they work for other people as well. But that said, after awakening, the short path, Ramana and self-inquiry, and Nisargadatta was another, I think, major proponent of just resting in the I am and these types of things. It's like, well, geez, that makes a lot of sense, because are you really purifying anything, or is it just it's like when Rupert Spira talks about his journey, he was doing all kinds of progressive path for 20, 30 years or something. He calls himself a late bloomer, but then it was more of a direct path encounter with his teacher, Francis Lucille, that brought the awakening. Now, that wasn't the case for me, but I think it's whatever resonates and whatever you're ripe with, ripe for. And then the pathless path is ultimately just not doing anything. It's a non-meditation, non-method of just simply being here now. And that's really tough to do, unless it isn't. I couldn't have begun to conceive of anything like that, let alone do it. When I started, I needed a technique, I needed something to do, and I needed a practice. And that's, but maybe somebody who is riper than I was, back in 1999, wouldn't. And so I think when Ramana, would meet people, he would always start at the default of the highest teaching, because you don't know if it's going to work or not. So he would bring that. And then if they couldn't conceive of a pathless path of just, you're it, this is it, then maybe tried the self-inquiry. And then if that wasn't going to work, then, okay, here's a progressive discipline that you could use. But I don't think there's a better or worse path. As an old former photographer, there's an old saying that there's an eternal debate among enthusiasts, gearheads they used to call them, about what's the best camera. And ultimately, everybody agrees that the best camera is the one you have with you when you need to take the picture.
Yeah.
And I would say it's the same it's true with the spiritual path. Is if it's resonating with you, it's working for you, go with it. And then if a shift is needed, it'll present itself. And don't get hung up on one being better than another, because it's solely dependent on the person.
Yeah. My interpretation of those words and those paths is that they can, on the one hand, their different ones can be appropriate for different people at different stages. Mm-hmm. And it's like, it's like mathematics. I mean, it's not that studying, calculus is better than studying or third grade arithmetic. Yep. Both are appropriate for people at different stages.
Yep.
But also, in a sense, all three can be components of one's path at the same time. Like, you can be having direct, dives into samadhi, for instance, and at the same time, day by day, you're progressing, mm-hmm. and then and then you also recognize that you're not doing anything and it's all being done. And so all those three are just different components of a path. And, I've moderated a panel discussion at one of the SAND conferences on this debate of direct versus progressive. And what I've found is that in many cases, people who are advocating the direct path, like, boom, you're done, all this progressive stuff is a waste of time, ended up getting into trouble later on, behaviorally and different things. And obviously some need for progress was there. So I don't know. I don't think it's an either or. I think it's
definitely not. They're not mutually exclusive. And right. For instance, in Yogananda's teachings, one of the central premises that I adopted very seriously early on is that he said, not only can you achieve it in one lifetime, but you're already there. Just all you have to do is improve your knowing. And that is certainly a short or pathless path tenet, that. So, these things ebb and flow according to whatever is appropriate at the time. And they're certainly not mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
And the short path or pathless could even be a little bit of a trap in terms of spiritual bypassing and not owning up to the work you've got to do, whether it's psychological or purification or whatever it may be. It holds that caveat as well.
It's been used that way, especially by Neo-Advaita people. Like, you're already enlightened, you don't need to do anything, and you just, it's a disservice to people to present them with that. And like, if Yogananda said you're already there, that's very true, but it might take you 40 years to actually fully embody that realization. And just the initial concept when you first hear it is not the same as fully embodying that realization.
Yeah, and I would say particularly in Grace Happens, but both books, they're written for anybody that's called to them. Certainly, they're not exclusive to one particular segment of the spiritual marketplace, but this one particular target group, so to speak, that I was trying to reach. It was the people that have been on the path for 20 or 30 or 40 years and seem to be able to get, over the hump. And while you can't make it happen, I think having the inner attitudinal stance of there and then surrendering, sometimes the step forward is the backward step. And
your audio broke up a little bit. Having the attitudinal stance of what?
Of surrender and knowing that we can't make it happen, and that the methods aren't the goal.
Right.
That the method, you don't mistake the map for the territories, sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So even an attachment, like the third Zen patriarch said, even an attachment to enlightenment is an attachment.
Yeah.
So as you're after 30 or 40 years, if you haven't found yourself in LA yet, using the SRF analogy or metaphor, then I would say you've got to work on surrender, because that's what I did at the end, and surrender to the point where I didn't even realize I was surrendering. It's just that, you just give up, and I'm not saying you to give up your practice, but you give up trying to control it. And I think that vulnerability, that openness, allows the grace to descend in a way that it finds it more difficult to do when you think you're controlling it and then you're gonna punch through. You're not. You do all you can, but then you just give it to God and let it happen the way it will.
Yeah, God helps those who help themselves. How about the free will and determinism thing? This is an age-old debate, and what's your take on it?
Oh yeah, I know. And that's one reason I wrote. It's like if I see another YouTube article or video about free will and determinism, I think I'm just going to throw up on my computer. And it's just it's not that difficult. There's always free will, but not in the way that people think. If the ego has no free will because it's just a mental construct, but we're not our ego, fortunately. So there is a connection, I think, to universal will, which does give us free will. And so for me, the idea of surrendering and all the things we do in our sadhana is it's like opening a camera aperture. And the more we're out of the way, the more that free will can flow. And even without that, relatively speaking, there are some pretty impressive results by people in the world who are operating under the premise that they're the ones doing it. 20 gold medals in the Olympics, or achieve some major, what most people in the world would call desirable goals. I mean, it's not like you can't achieve anything in separation consciousness, but
even then, some of the great achievers, Michael Jordan and other people, talk about being in the zone. Arthur Ashe, others, where you just feel like you're not doing anything, and it's just being done through you or somehow, and that's when you're at your best.
And that can happen all the time because once the ego mind has been transcended, and unity is I mean, there's always unity, but now it. Then that's the feeling you have all the time, that life just flows in a perfect way. And if action needs to take place, it does. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. And so, free will and determinism, you could say both are true from a different perspective.
Yeah. I think one thing that helps to resolve the debate is not to try to make absolutes out of it. We don't have, at least in the ordinary state of consciousness, we don't have absolute free will, nor are we absolutely determined. We have a certain amount of leeway, a certain amount of wiggle room, and according to how we exercise the free will we seem to have, we either move in the direction of less conditioning, greater freedom, or more conditioning, greater bondage. And so, you just kind of move up on the scale or down on the scale, as the case may be. But if you think about it, if we could do anything we wanted to do, what would we want to do? Well, we'd want to sort of, the way you and I think about things, we would want to sort of be in complete attunement with the will of God. And in a sense, that would be the ultimate free will. And yet also that's the ultimate not having any free will whatsoever, because it's God's will now, it's not yours.
That's right. And I think Ibn Arabi said, I love Sufism and Sufic teachings, especially Ibn Arabi. And he said something to that effect where, when I realized my greatest freedom is when I became God's servant.
Yeah.
Paraphrasing, but that's just what you said, is that it's in surrender that we gain our ultimate freedom.
And we're using the word God here as if we assume that everyone agrees there is one or knows what we mean by the word. What's your understanding? I realize this is a kind of a big question, but what's your understanding of what God is? How would you explain it?
Well, he's certainly not an old guy in a white beard. I mean, people, I get how you could maybe want to conceptualize it that at a certain point, but I don't see God as personal. I see it as infinite existence, infinite conscious existence, and that everything is happening in and as the divine mind. So there isn't anything that isn't God, and there isn't anything outside God. It is literally the light of awareness, you could say, or conscious awareness. There's all kinds of terms that point to it, but of course, you're never going to be able to objectify God. You can only live it.
Yeah, I'd like to say that God is hiding in plain sight, because just from what we know about what science has taught us. If you look closely at anything and understand the laws of nature that are functioning in the universe, wow, that's just like this amazing display of intelligence at every level. Just a single cell, what's going on is mind-boggling. Or the clusters of galaxies, and just at every scale, wherever you look, large or small, there's this orderliness and non-random, non-accidentalness of the way things are functioning that just makes you feel like it's just one great big ocean of intelligence, and we're just little fish which are actually made of the same stuff, but often consider ourselves separate from it, and often suffer thirst despite the fact that we're swimming in this ocean of infinite satiation.
Yeah, it's the old, you've heard the old metaphor. It's like the fish don't see the water,
right?
It's hidden in plain sight that you don't see it until you do.
Yeah.
So and so I think what's really exciting is science is starting to see that in its own way. I mean, quantum mechanics certainly, but when I look at somebody like Bernardo Kastrup, who's his analytical idealism. I mean, he's a guy who's like, I'm not awakened. I'm a hardhead that way, but I'm this through rigorous analysis. I have determined that this is how things are, and the conclusions that he comes to beautifully elucidate my awareness experience now. But he's come about it from a completely, it's not a lived experience for him, and he admits that, but yet there's a way of coming through from that angle that you can at least cognitively understand the mystical experience.
Yeah,
and I think that's really good for people who need that.
He's a Jnani, really. He's like a genius with this brilliant intellect, and he's able to parse the subtle understanding of reality so finely, and that I think it's more of a lived experience for him than he might realize.
Well, I agree. I think it'll happen for him.
Yeah.
What I really appreciate about Bernardo and Rupert's as well, who they're friends, is I think part of the obstacles that we have in understanding these things is everybody's got their own terminology, and they don't necessarily jibe, and so it's confusing. And so I've tried to be, I think they both do a wonderful job in that, in stripping religious jargon and spiritual jargon and being very, very easily approachable. And I've tried to do that as best I can. I don't write as well as Bernardo does, and I'm not as articulate verbally, certainly, as Rupert is, but I find myself trying to emulate their technical expression as much as I can, because I think it's helpful.
Yeah, well, I think you're a really good writer, and I'm not just saying that. You kind of make me, you disincentivize me from writing a book, because I think I could never write a book that well.
I'm telling you, I've got a great editor. That's why.
Yeah, well, if I ever write one, I'll get in touch with him. But yeah, and your books are interesting as sort of, I found them just full of all kinds of interesting points and thought-provoking, but they're nice reference manuals too, because you refer to all these teachers and footnote them in many cases, where one can explore other angles, and you just give them a taste that they might inspire them to explore those angles.
Hopefully, the second book, which will be out in a couple of weeks, it's early July, I think, is when it's going to hit Amazon, and then they can, if somebody wants an autographed copy with a bookmark, they can contact my editor. I don't, as you mentioned at the beginning, I don't have a website or any social media presence, and I don't think I ever will. But if you go to, I guess you'll have the link. It's
I'll put the links on your Batgap page.
Yeah, then they go there and they can shoot a message to Ellie, and he'll forward it to me, and I can send him one. Or if somebody is in the northern San Diego County area, Soulscape in Encinitas is the exclusive bookseller for, they've got Awakening now, and then they'll have Reflections in a couple of weeks. Well, maybe about 3 weeks. And
Awakening now, or Grace Happens?
Well, it's Grace Happens. Sorry, Grace Happens. They have now. I meant awakening now. Grace happens an awakening of consciousness. They have that now.
Oh, I see. Oh, I see what you mean. Okay.
And then the reflections of consciousness, and then the subtitle is Essays on the Journey of Awakening and the Nature of Reality.
They'll have that soon.
And they'll be out. They'll have it. So I like promoting the local bookstores because they're getting fewer and far between. So anybody in this area that wants one can get them there too.
Yeah. So you have no intention to do Zoom meetings or any kind of a interactive, things like that. All right, no problem. Bunch of people.
I don't. I mean,
you'd be good at it if you did, but it's no big deal. You don't.
I'm not saying it couldn't happen. I mean, I never know, but that's certainly not my intention.
Yeah.
But the books are there, and they are designed to again, they're not promoting an ideology or methodology. They're just, here's a description of what happened to me.
Yeah. No, that's really good.
And then here are the things that went into the particular stew that got me to where I am. And if you find them interesting, you can explore them. And it's across the board. I mean, I will forever be grateful to SRF and Yogananda as my guru. But when I say that, it bothered some people, I think, when I said that after awakening, the guru isn't necessarily needed anymore. And it's not that there isn't still a relationship going on there, but the relationship changes. And the ultimate tip of the cap is you don't need him anymore because it worked. If you had a great calculus teacher and you graduated, you don't need to go back and take the course again. You got it, So I'm forever grateful for that. But there was so much more that went, into my process. And that isn't just spiritual teachings, but it's all the people that I've known in this life, my family, my friends, the Upa gurus, that aren't necessarily the teacher, but teach you things about life. I'm grateful to everyone I've ever known and everything I've ever had to experience, whether it was pleasant or unpleasant, because it all got me to where I am.
Yeah, that's very well put. I think we'll end it there. That's we can't top that little point. So thanks, Phil. It's been really fun talking to you for a couple hours, and it was really great reading your book. And I hope we get to meet in person one of these days.
That'd be great, Rick. It's both you and Irene have been wonderful from the beginning, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come on. And even if we don't do another one of these, I hope we stay in touch because
for sure.
I've shared some emails about some of the things we're concerned about in terms of spiritual ethics and involvement with ASI, which I think is commendable. And so
Association for Spiritual Integrity, Mr. Acronym.
I had to throw one last acronym at you there, just to drive people crazy. But it's there's enough out there that isn't necessarily what it purports to be or what is healthy for people. That I think the group that you're involved with is really helpful for people. So I thank you for doing that.
Yeah, that's part of what I'm inclined to do. Okay, so thanks to those who've been listening or watching. And if most of you are probably familiar with Batgap, and if you're not, you just stumbled upon this, don't just look at the YouTube channel, check out the website, because we have some things there that you won't find on the YouTube channel. And also there's some ways we've categorized and organized the interviews on the website that are hard to do on YouTube. And there's, you can sign up to be notified by email whenever there's a new interview. And then there's the Batgap bot, which is this big project I've been working on. It's an AI chat bot that has a vast wealth of spiritual wisdom loaded into it, and you can ask it questions and interact with it and all. So anyway, it rolls along. So thanks, Phil, and we'll be in touch, as you say.
Thanks, Rick. God bless everyone out there, and I appreciate your time here today. I hope it helps.
All right. I think it will.
All right.
All right.
Take care.
Okay, bye.